Hello and welcome to presentation number 6 from the Missing Faces in Teaching, and my name is Dr. Marie Charles. Now, today's presentation is going to focus on my latest research, and we're going to look at the foundations of the surname Nichols, Nicholson, Nicolai. But just before the crests start to appear on this particular slide, I would like to give a special thank you to Professor Carver, one of our master teachers, who continues to honour, respect and support my research from across the pond. A special thank you to him. I'd also like to extend my appreciation to the MFIT supporters who continue to read and be informed by the latest revelations from my work, and I appreciate you taking the time to read my work and the positive comments. Thank you for that. Now, as those particular crests start to come in on this slide, my work has taken me all over Europe, France, Britain, Germany, and in this latest research I have found myself focusing on the surname Nicholas, Nickman, Nicolai. Why? Because it appears as the evidence and the history. Now, if we look, for example, at Nickman's, we know from the literature that Nicol, Nicholas, Nicolai are diminutives of Nicholas or Nicholas, a personal name introduced into Britain by the Normans. And the surname is derived from the Greek, meaning victorious people. Now that does sound like the Normans. Now the Normans transformed Lincoln, which is another region in Britain, into Nicol, of very common occurrence in medieval chronicles. And so we find the dominance of the Normans at the centre of the origin of our surnames. We also know that Nicolai, if you look at that bottom crest, you will see that it is formed of a prefix and a compound. And so Nicolai, ni, we find in the Gaelic language, which means daughter, and cola finds itself from an elite family, the Colas from France. And so from Cola or Nicolai into Cola, we find the foundational families setting themselves up in those regions. Now, I'd like us to have a little look at Nickman for two reasons. It has the sacred geometry of the dominant X in the centre, and we also find that the Netherlands has an ancient Kemetic link to the name as well. And so the dominant X, I write about this in issue 11, and it means scienta or scient, which means to be full of knowledge. And note where his head is positioned on the X, because he's part of that knowledge system, you see. They could have just put the X there, but they put the person there so that you would know who they were and what they looked like. Now, Netherlands has the word nature within it as a compound word. And we find that, I wrote about this in issue number 9, and it is related to Scotland. the ancient royal region of Fife, which is absolutely incredible in terms of the evidence. But we find that Natir Urquhart in Fife, in Scotland, is still on the map, you see, because they're leaving traces of themselves, their naming systems, so that we would recover them to know exactly who they were. And of course, Necha or Nether can be identified as Necha, as the infinite all or the infinite one. And you will see all of the material culture connected to Fife in those issues on Scotland. We also find the Fordell family in Fife from the Fordell Castle, and that's in issue 14. And so collectively, when we look at those crests on this opening slide, we see that we can trace the very common name of Nickmans, Nicholas, Nikolai, Nicole, and they feature everywhere. And these are the foundational faces of that particular surname. Now, this particular slide is a little bit of a deviation from where we're going to today with Nichols and Nicholson, but I wanted to show you the power of research methodologies such as etymology, onomastics, phenomenology, how they will always take you back to the source, the beginning, the origin. Now, another of our great master teachers, Dr. John Henry Clark, said that all history is a current event. Now, this particular individual, John Brown, I came across literally only this week that a recent display from Dorset Museum showcased John Brown as an enslaved, or rather escaped slave from Virginia, who finds his way in Dorset, one of our southern regions in Britain. He finds himself on British soil, but he's an escaped slave, John Brown. Now there's a whole museum display centered around this escaped slave, but my research is showing that he, John Brown, through onomastics, is actually an indigenous foundational Black Briton. How do I know this? Well, first of all, the story just does not hold together. It's not plausible. It has all sorts of weaknesses. I mean, even if you look at how he's dressed, he is supposedly from the museum's narrative, he is an escaped slave. He has no money, he has no means of supporting himself, but he miraculously somehow sets up his own business, pharmaceutical business, and becomes very, very successful. But if we go back to his foundations, first of all, let's look at his name, John Brown. Now, Brown is generally understood as a nickname from Middle English, from Brun or Le Brun, from Old English Brun or Old French Brun, both of Germanic origin. An Old High German Brun. This is B-R-U-N. Then we find the German form of Brun or Brown, spelt with a H, silent, Brun, Bruno. Brun means the brown one, leading into the old Saxon barons called the Brunons around the 9th century. Okay. Then we find in the literature, this one is in issue 4, that in the in 2 of the South Midland counties of England leads us to that of colour names, as surnames and place names, onomastics, which may probably have been derived from our original settlers. For example, Brown has been derived from the Anglo-Saxon brun, signifying brown. It is not unreasonable to doubt that when our forefathers called a man brun or brown, they gave him his name as a description of his brown complexion. And so we find those migrations moving with the surnames from Germany into Britain. And then we also find that the indigenous people of Dorset, this is where John Brown set up his business, were called the Morini people. Now I write about that in issue 16 and 17. And you will see in those issues all of the material culture from Dorset, and you will see all of their creative outlets and their foundations. And so John Brown is an indigenous foundational Black Briton, you see, moving through and settling on the land. The evidence completely and utterly negates the recent display from Dorset Museum that says he is an enslaved, escaped slave from Virginia. You see, we must interrogate everything. It's very important that we analyse everything that is presented to us from mainstream narratives. Now, also in issue 16, I don't have that here, but there's also a section on the Dorset people from Canada. And that was the work of Dr. David Imhotep, and he shows that they were foundational blacks of that particular land. And so as we move back into Nicholas, the etymology and the onomastics of Nikolai, Nicholas, this slide is going to get quite heavy with lots of images, which I always try to avoid, but there was just so much information I couldn't avoid it. But just momentarily, I just want to conclude on the Brun and the Brown surname, that I have so many crests that are 200 to 300 years old on Brun, Brunette, Bruno from Denmark, Germany and France, that all support John Brown's lineage as foundational to the land. Now, as we return to Nikolai, we see those locations on the map, and we see that Nikolai, the surname with Kola inside, is from Austria. Then we see Nickmans way up in Brabant in the Netherlands, or the Natuurlands. And then we find the Nicholas surname from de Nevola and de la Tour de Pin region in France. And we also find that, now this is in, obviously, this is in issue 18, my latest issue, that I show a very concrete example of how those people are moving and migrating up from France into Essex. We find a pottery trade with Colchester into Essex with the black nobility, and you will see a beautiful set of examples of these foundational black elites that carve themselves on this pottery, and they're moving through into Essex. It's always a link back from the continent. Now, let's have a look at Kola, the Kola surname, because we find that Kola is also where we get the name Collins, Colson, Colette, close, and coals. That would become Coleman as well. And so we see the main stem, the origin from Nicholas. We also find that during the period of Edward the Confessor, 11th century, that one Nicholas de Albini, alias Nicole, came over from Normandy and was the common ancestor of the Nicole family. Cola is very interesting because we find that cola is a derivative of cola in Welsh, which means the neck, and in Scots, cola means the head or the summit, and in Greek, cola means glue. And it's almost as if we have this composite image of the origin of a person being put back together again, and its strands as it moves across the map. And we're kind of putting all of this back together today in this presentation. Now you're going to find that as it emerges on the slide, that we find the most magnificent lead seal of St. Nicholas. And you see him here to the right. He's clearly a melanated individual from his phenotype, and this is just under 1,000 years old, and we're retaining the surname through the evidence, St. Nicholas. And so these original foundational melanated people, because that's what they are the founders of those spaces that we see on the map, moving through with their surnames. It's important that we look at that map today and we look at the sheer spread and the geospatial aspects of one name. And you will be able to see from my other presentations the sheer density of those surnames and their origins as they're mapped out and shown in those issues 16, 17 and 18. Now, because of the importance of heraldry and the crests, I've kind of found that Coca-Cola, as those two words, actually have a foundational black origin. And as you can see on the images that are appearing on this slide, the heraldry from France is showing the same design signification as the Pepsi symbol that is used today. And what they have done, the power structure, what they have done is that they have taken original iconographic images that were laid out by foundational cultures and inserted a new way or a new product to sell. But they have very ancient beginnings. And that particular individual that you see on the page his name is, this is 300 years old, this text, and his name is Jacques Moreau, and he's positioned in between the red, white and blue, and we know that that is also a cosmological origin to those particular triple trio colours being used. But his face is in the centre, you see, and Jacques Moreau is a doctor. And I have hundreds of these crests that will appear in my dictionary of surnames coming soon. And he is a doctor. And I think placed him, he's somewhere in Normandy. But you see the origin, you see the antecedents of what Dr. Clarke talked about, that all history is a current event. But we must always go back in time, you see, through the research and find the foundational black cultures who are the originators of these surnames and these place names on the map. And so there isn't anything new, because it was already laid out by our ancestors. And so we find more evidence of Saint Nicholas and his progenitors as they move through the land in France and into Britain. But this particular image is from Tavannes in France, and it is a beautiful foundational black couple from the crypt of Saint Nicholas. And there you see him with, we presume that's his lady, with him dressed beautifully, impeccably, both of them, as they are depicted on this particular wall in France. Now, what we have to remember is that how difficult it is with the research to find these particular primary source images, because what has happened is that many of these churches, I find a lot of my evidence from the churches, the original facades and church walls, that many of them have been destroyed under the reconstruction or restoration process. This is the phrases that are being used that are actually obliterating the original cultures of those particular lands, France, Germany, Britain, all over the continent. And this image is approximately, and if you go back to the map, you will see it's about 150 miles from Paris. And it's a very important piece of evidence that substantiates, as you can see from the very beginning of this presentation, the families that have been retained with the surname Nicholas, Cola. And also you will see the connection, because we're always connecting the continent with the rest of Britain and those micro regions, which my research focuses a lot on those micro regions, that there is a beautiful Norman font that is found in Sussex, this region in Britain. Sussex is where William Conqueror arrives on the shores, and the Battle of Hastings. But we must connect that with the pre-existing foundations that he found on those shores. And we find a Norman font, as we mentioned, the Normans and the surnames of these priestly figures, and the font is described as Saint Nicholas, you see. And when we look at those images from Sussex emerging on this slide, we see their phenotype very clearly depicted. They are the indigenous foundational cultures of that region, and they are clearly connected with their kinfolk from France. If you look carefully as well, you will notice that their hands have been styled in a particular way, with their palms showing, and we know that they are the mudras, or the significations of the hands, which are so important. And I've also shown the cultural continuities of that in issue number 6 with Ireland. And we see all of these priestly or wise ones in those mudra hand positions. There was only one culture, and it was black in origin and foundation. This is what the evidence tells us through onomastics, etymology, phenomenology, and archaeology, and anthropology. All the ologies come together when we are rescuing our culture. And this is what we must do. Okay, now this particular slide again is quite a heavy slide with a lot of information. So I will try to go through it sensibly. Now, there is a very, very important surname that I have discovered in this particular issue. And you will see a name or a face, a Moorish face, coming onto the map. Now that's not actually that is not actually the crest, but the name that I'm so excited to find its origin, its FB origin, is the word passport was actually a surname. And this is where we get the word passport from. And yes, it has a foundational black origin. It is found in Natir, or the Netherlands, or the Netherlands. And this is in issue 18, my latest one. And the surname passport was originally located in Middelburg in the Netherlands. And the Dutch word has its origins with the primordial populations of ancient Europe. And so the Moors who controlled the Puats, would lose the unstressed vowel A through the process known as syncope in phonology to become the word port. Now, you cannot actually see the crest. The crest is here in issue 18, but it is a Moor positioned between two legs that are crossed. And so we know that the cross is another form of scienta, or skill, or cunning, which is another ancient knowledge system. And so his head is positioned beneath two cross legs on this crest. And so we find the everyday word or object that we use to travel, passport, traveling across and affecting the whole world. Because we all have passports, and it has a black origin. We find the surname Passmore as a derivative of passport, which becomes passport, was found in Devon and Somerset, you see, migrating through from the Natir or Netherlands. It's also a nickname from Middle English, pass, to go across, passar, and passenger, you see. This is where we get these words from. They also represent an Anglo-Norman French nickname, pasmer, from pass, to cross, as above, and mer, the sea. And so every name has an origin and can be found with a little bit of methodological know-how, how to uncover these names. Now, the surname Engles from my last presentation has formed, I would say, the majority of my journey into Germany to find the kinfolk of Engles or Angles, which would become Engelland and Anglia, you see. This surname Engles moves into Anglia, which is the angled part of the map, as you can see. and it begins to form the foundational people populations of that region. Now, I have written a whole issue on the material culture and the people and what they looked like, and it's probably one of the most powerful pieces of research that I have done to date. And so we can locate Engels again from my last presentation, but now it has movement and form as it begins to inform our understanding of those Angles of Anglia who would become the Engellands of that region. There's also another very, very powerful piece of evidence that is actually not on this map, not on this slide, because there's just too much information. But we know that when we're talking about those very first people that move through, they're coming from this part of the map, Germany and Belgium and the Netherlands or the Netherlands, and they're moving through and populating Britain. The evidence substantiates that. But also we know from previous research, the Iberian migrations, you see, over many millennia are also populating parts of Britain and Scotland and Ireland. This is very, very important. But what I have found as another first, I believe this will be the first time ever shown, is he's almost 2,000 years old. And he is an original Iberian. And it is a very beautiful constructed statuette. He's not here on this particular slide. It's here in the issue 18. But he has been carved so magnificently with his phenotype intact and his body that it just absolutely blew me away. Because what we find through the research is we find these great researchers talking about the Iberians. And yes, they describe them as dark and their complexion and swarthy and so on. But it always helps to have a primary source to look at. And it's here now. And so when we look at the particular image, it's just incredible. It really is incredible. And you will see that image in issue 18. And we now have the proof and the evidence to support our claims. There is also another very powerful piece of evidence that is informing the German kinfolk who move into Engles, or the Angles of East Anglia. And I wrote about this in issue 8. And that particular image that you see here, it is a carved face, clearly of a foundational black German. But what is so staggering about that particular artifact is its date. And I just want to read this little bit here, because in issue 8 I show the facial reconstruction of the people, but also the flint description of the face here. You can clearly see. Now, this worked flint shows anthropomorphic figurations found in the Ohla gravel pit of Großpampau in Germany, which is approximately 30 miles from Hamburg, as you see on the map. Now, I need you to hear this. The flint face has been dated to 500,000 years old. The archaeologist Ursel Bennenkendorf has been researching worked stoned implements from the Pampau gravel kit near Hamburg in 1985. And when I presented my materials to the museum officials as artifacts, they were rejected. They had never seen anything like them before. But what she found in connection with that flint head with the stone axes and the anthropological remains, skeletons, and continuing from this article, cultural paleoanthropologist Dr. James Harrod states there is evidence of reworking based on patina during the ice retreat. These artifacts, or this artifact, is fairly securely dated between 423,000 years to 524,000 years. You see, this is incredible. This is incredible, and this is what we must do with the evidence. We have to keep putting it back together as that famous jigsaw puzzle. We look at the people, we look at their material culture, we know logically that they set up their foundations, that they would name themselves, that they would become the bearers of the surnames, and they would begin to migrate and trade with people around the continent and the planet, and they would move across and they would retain their original names. But we have to keep digging and showing this coherent picture, history, as we rescue the evidence. And so as we move towards the conclusion of this presentation, I've been able to present just a snippet, a sliver of what is abundant in my new issue 18. It is quite incredible in terms of how I show the connection between Germany and France and the Natir, or the Netherlands, in terms of their cultural connections and their kinship. And you will see in this issue, again, it can only ever be a snippet in these presentations, but you will read about the populations of Anglia, or the Engles, of Engelland, and they became the original abbots and nuns, and you will see their deeply melanated faces for the first time. I will show, and I do show in this issue, that those priories and abbeys were set up by deeply melanated people. You will see the women, you will see the men, and you will read about, and this again is substantiated, that they set up the first centres of learning that would then seed the schools that would become the universities. And this is incredible. They are being set up in the 4th and 5th and 6th century. And I show how those rulers, those melanated rulers, were being influenced by what was happening on the continent. These incredible scholars and their scholarship and their degrees that they were attaining very, very early on in those medieval periods. And they're here in this issue 18. And you will learn about that and so much more. And I think it is important because, yes, it's very labour intensive. The micro analysis and the research on those regions takes a lot of time and a lot of reading and a lot of digging. But what it is doing, it's laying the foundation not only for the populations that perhaps, that many people are not familiar with, but what this particular issue and the preceding ones have done is to lay the fertile research ground that I'm now moving into, and it will be the dictionary of surnames, and that's what I'm working on now. So my next publication is going to show, because I've laid it out, the populations of those regions, those micro regions, are now going to become the macro demonstrations of those surnames as they move through. And so, as we come to the end of this presentation, I hope that you support the work of the Missing Faces in Teaching. Yes, you know, I don't receive any external funding to carry out this work. And as Professor Carber always teaches, the ancestors will keep taking you where you need to go. And I am being guided to be taken where the research needs to follow. And so I thank you, and I look forward to my next presentation and your feedback, or your feed forward, as you read this latest research and information. And until next time, Ku Amsha, to awaken.